Good morning, everybody. I am looking forward to being in community with you. My name is Dr. Annice Fisher, and I'm the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching, and I'm presenting this webinar on behalf of the National Association of Women Business Owners. I'd like to welcome you to this space. To get us started, if you want to put the type of organization that you are leading, I can see your names pretty clearly. That would help me as I go throughout our time together. So, NAWBO is an organization that focuses on supporting women business owners who want to grow their companies, focus on leadership and impact. And we provide a variety of different ways for you to connect with us through peer connections and masterminds, education and leadership development workshops for all different stages of the business, from early stage to folks who've had their businesses for 10, 15, 20 plus years. And we see ourselves as serving as a trusted community that opens the doors of opportunity for women. And so I'll hop into our session today. I should tell you that I am an interactive presenter. And so if you don't have a notebook, I would encourage you to grab something to write with or pull up on your cell phone or your computer a note page, because one of the things that I like to do is to make sure that when someone comes and spends their precious time, because time is precious, that you're able to walk away with some tangible things that you could apply immediately. And so today we're going to focus on how do you sustain your team during organizational change. And so I'm going to walk you through a framework that we teach people called the PREP framework, PREP leadership framework. And I'm just going to start by naming a couple of things. Many of us are holding the need to make change and evolve in our organizations right now. It's being held in the midst of people in your organization having different types of emotions. There's uncertainty. Some people are excited. Some people are not excited. Some of us might be thinking about, do I have the capacity on my team to actually do the work that I need to do, given all the changing conditions in the world? And then some of us might be tired, right? Some of your teams might be tired. So this webinar is just not going to be about strategy. It is going to be about leadership in real life. This idea of how am I going to lead my team through change? And a little bit about us as an organization developing capacity. We focus on building the capacity of leaders to do good in the world. And we focus mainly on this idea of creating a lab and an accelerated experience. So when people are going through the change process, whether it's changing a policy or changing their entire system, we create environments where we can provide folks with leadership coaching, team capacity building, so doing work to help strengthen your team. How do you deal with the resistance of change? How do you make sure that your folks are restored? How do you make sure that you're keeping track of so whether or not the change that you thought was a good idea after 3 months is still the best course of action for your particular team? I think it's always important for you to have an understanding as well as who's in front of you and what gives me the credibility to come and speak to you. Now, of course, BACP has vetted me, so that's one source of credibility. But I've spent the last 20 plus years of my career really at the intersection of leadership development for folks. How do you build new and innovative things within your organization? And that's across multiple sectors, from education to state agencies to government, to corporate spaces with mayors, boards, superintendents, frontline workers, cafeteria workers. So we have our work has spanned from the highest level in the organization down to folks who are doing the day-to-day operation. So when we're building our work, we're thinking about all of those different areas. In particular, my work often centers on this piece that it's multi-generational. We have to appreciate all of the knowledge and brilliance that exists in any given room, from our most seasoned person to the person that's the newest one in the organization. And that we have to look at this from a place of, we have to honor the humanity of the people who work in the organization. And what do I mean by that? Is that people are given lots of hours of their lives in service of your mission. And so, how do we do right by those people with hopes that they're going to do right by us? And sometimes people will people, as I say, but that doesn't mean you have to people back to them. So, we approach this work through the conversation of leadership, which is a set of practices. How do I move in the world? How do I inspire people around a shared vision? How do I build teams around me to actually do this work? And the last thing I'll say is I'm a Chicagoan, born and bred, was born in Inglewood, but I've lived all around the country and I'm back home in Chicago now. I take this approach from a strengths-based approach. So how do we look at what are the assets? How do we look at what people do well and understand what they do well and then maximize that in the work environment? Because when you focus on what people do well, you can help them overcome a lot of their challenges and a lot of their areas of growth. I am trained in a concept called immunity to change, which means that I'm trained in helping people to overcome their resistance to change. And I also am trained in interpersonal violence and a safe zone ally as well. Okay, so enough about me. Let's get into the business. So every organization will go through change. We know that. In the chat box, I want you all to tell me how many of you are currently going through a change in your organization. Just say me in the chat box. There's 37 people on here, so I should see the chat box lighting up. Okay. So me. Folks are coming in like, okay, that's why I'm here, Dr. Fisher. And the key thing I want to start us off with is the truth is that your organization is going through change, but your organization is not experiencing the change. It's the people in your organization that's experiencing the change. And so we can't treat change as if it's something technical that I want to do this new policy, this new process. I want to introduce this new product. And that's the only thing I have to worry about. Change is a human experience. And so we have to consider the humans that are going through that process. And then we have to think about resilience. And so I titled this workshop Resilience. How do you sustain your team resilience? Because I want to be clear about what resilience is and what resilience is not. So before I get into the frameworks, let me share this. Resilience is not asking people to keep pushing through. Go ahead and write that down if you got it, or put it in the chat box if I can get someone to double click with me. Resilience is not about just telling people to push through. And that's the way we've talked about resilience. Get up, you got to keep pushing through. You got to keep pushing through. It's not about ignoring burnout and creating awards in our organization for the person who worked the latest and who is the most tiredest. And we see that as a form of commitment to the mission. And resilience is not about productivity at any cost. Because again, our organizations are powered by humans, and we have to make sure that we're caring for the humans. So what resilience is, it's about us creating the conditions in our organization so that we can adapt and change, and we don't lose people in the process. Some people may go, and it's okay because they may not want to be involved in the change, but we don't lose people because they feel like we didn't care about them in the process of change. And resilience is about giving your folks and setting up your organization in such a way that you can move through change with all the bumps, the highs, the lows, but people don't feel like they have to abandon themselves in the process. Okay? I know I said a lot there, but y'all still tracking with me? Just say yeah in the chat box. Okay. So I want you to tell me in the chat box, when you think about the word change in your organization right now, I just want you to think about what's going on in your organization. What word comes up for you? Is it excitement, nervousness, fear? Just put that word in the chat box. What words come up to engagement, opportunity? Yes. Change equals challenges. Yes. Okay. Apprehensive. Yeah, those are real feelings for people. Improvement. Yep. Collaboration, enhancement, cautious optimism. Yeah, a lot of people come in with, I don't know about this, but I'm gonna keep my hope up. As the late Jesse Jackson Sr. would say, keep hope alive. Chaos, yeah, turmoil, caution. So we see a lot of different words that come up for people, and all of these words are valid, but they tell us something. We have a range from advancement, excitement, passion, to turmoil, chaos, and cautious. So that tells us that change is not neutral, that change is going to land differently with people in your organization based on where they are. And that's exactly why I'm going to walk you through a framework to help you hold all of those ranges, because we can't necessarily erase them, but we have to, one, acknowledge that they're there and then begin to work through them. So if we want to have sustainable change, we're going to walk through this framework that I call PREP, P-R-E-P. And one of the things that we like to do at Developing Capacity is to make sure, as I said when I first opened, that it's broken down into something basic that people can apply. That all 40 of you that are on this call right now, if you want to, you're going to get a handout at the end that has these 4 steps. And you can take it and start applying it right away. You're going to take notes throughout, of course, but you can take this to your next meeting and work through this with your team. And it's prep for a reason, because we have to prepare if we want sustainable change. And I want to be clear to say that when you are preparing and continuing to sustain people through change, that doesn't mean things won't pop up. Things happen all the time, right? We can't curate change in a way where life won't happen, because when life lives, we have to respond to life. But this is just a way for you to think about how to move into that process. The P stands for preserving what matters. So I saw a lot of people saying an opportunity for collaboration and evaluation, an opportunity for, collaboration and evaluation. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read through these, but it's going quickly. Okay, you got your hand out now. Don't jump off, Celia. Okay. And then we saw cautious optimism and advancement. But we have to determine, what do we want to keep and what do we need to let go? Because in the change process, we can't get rid of everything. There's some things that you have built within your organizations or you have been a part of building that's sacred that you actually want to hold on to. And we're going to walk through, how do you identify what could be preserved? Secondly, recognize the human impact. That's when we're going to talk about understanding the impact on the human beings in your organization. And sometimes what we call resistance is not necessarily meaning that people don't agree with your change, but people resist change for a variety of different reasons. And one of my professors at Harvard, Ron Heifetz, used to say, people don't resist change, they resist loss. Because whenever we bring change to people, we're asking them to lose something. So if you come and tell me you want to introduce a new process for how we onboard new mothers to our program, that I might think we need a new process because I'm tired of spending hours upon hours filling out paperwork by my hand. So I might agree with the change. But if this means I need to learn a new computer system, now I'm going to be timed, then I might show up and disagree with you in the meeting, not because I don't think we need the improvement, but because I'm losing some level of predictability in my job. Because I know when I show up to work, these are the 4 things I do. This is how I onboard the person. I know I'm going to spend 3 hours on paperwork. So that's the part of the recognizing the human impact, and where you'll see some of my resistance to change background come up in here. The third thing is embedding resilience practices. So you cannot self-care your way into building resilience on your team. There's some things that you have to think about embedding in your team, not as an afterthought. And then the last thing is propel sustainable momentum, which means, how do you help people sustain the momentum for change? And one of the things that we often talk about in developing capacity and we teach our folks to do is going through the change process is highs and lows. So you have to have a strategy to keep your team going. And it's not a rah, rah, rah clap for Susie at the meeting all the time. You have to think about how do you keep people and their stamina up during the process. So we're going to walk through this prep method. I'm going to introduce the concept. I'm going to give you the questions on how you do it. And then I'm going to give you time to practice with me, because the last 15 minutes of our time together will be Q&A. So you're going to get me here to answer any questions that may have come up as you were filling this out for yourself or individual to your organization. And you can use the Q&A feature for that. So you can jot your questions as we go along. So the first thing we're going to look at is this idea of preserving what matters. And I always say to folks, we need to have an anchor before we start accelerating. And think of an anchor similar to like an anchor on a ship, which is like when you dock a ship, you got to put the anchor in there so the ship doesn't float away. And so if you don't have anchors, it can create anxiety within your organization. And so as a leader or leaders, you must be able to define what remains stable. So that means, what are we not going to change? And so some of the things that I see happening with folks is when change starts to happen, we don't tell people what's going to remain stable. And so then people start to wonder, like, wait, what are we losing? What's in this for me? Like, how is this going to impact me? So this is about stabilizing your organization so they know this is up for negotiation. This is not up for negotiation. And you have to let them know what commitments are not going to shift. So for example, some people may say, our mission will stay the same, but we have to change the way that we do services because we get federal funding and federal funding has changed. So our mission is the same, but we need to change the way we talk about our services. Did anybody have to do that when we had all of the changes happening? You could just put it in the chat box. Some people will say, our core values will always be the same. But every couple of years, we're introducing new products and services because we have to keep up with what's going on in the world. But again, I'm telling them what's going to remain the same. So, and this is how you begin to build that resilience, because you're telling people, hey, here's how we're going to preserve what matters. And you're giving people something solid to stand on. So what does this look like in practice? It's being very clear. And so here's just some reflection questions you can ask yourself, and this is on your handout, and then I'm going to give you a chance to practice in a moment. You can say, what must remain stable during this transition? So you have to be able to sit down, you and your team, and whoever's helping you with whatever it is you're changing, those people who said me, and say, what is going to remain the same? What is not going to change in this process? So for us, we do work all around the country. And because of the changing climate, we have to think about how we talk about the work that we do. So I said to my team, what's always going to be true to us is we're always going to give blueprints. We're always going to talk about restoration. We're always going to talk about leadership development. Like I gave clear, like, here's what will not change. And then you want to say, what core value or commitment cannot be compromised? What are we saying that cannot be compromised in the process? No matter what we're changing, we're not going to compromise this. And then, have I clearly communicated what is not changing? And these are questions for you to ask yourself reflectively. And then you have to take an action step. So after you take time to think about those things, then you have to do something. And that's why prep is no prep if you don't move. And so the action step is to name what your anchors are. So within the next 2 weeks, take time to think about, like, what are the 3 non-negotiables for the change process? And you don't have to do this by yourself. You can do it with your team. At your next meeting, your next team meeting, if you have a leader team around you, Or if it's just you, then you can identify it by yourself. But if you have people around you, have directors, assistant directors, or program coordinators, you can just sit down with them and say, okay, we know that we have to do this change. Okay, what are our 3 things that we are not going to compromise on? Get a piece of chart paper, a big piece of post-it, or write it on the whiteboard, or if you virtual, type it up in the chat and say, okay, then let's vote on these. Let's take the top 3 that we say we are not going to change. But you, as the person that, if you're the person that's the director or the head of a unit or the head of the organization, you have to have those in your mind already before you sit down, not to tell people what to do, but to make sure, because you have the picture of the organization at a level that other people don't have. Okay. Because when you have that clarity, it's going to reduce anxiety. The anxiety won't go away, but it'll reduce it. Okay, so now it's time for you to practice. I want you to take a moment and I want you to write down 3 pillars that you feel like you must preserve to remain grounded. And I'll give you an example of what we did. So we said that 1, we're going to make sure that we keep our honoring humanity question, which is before we start any meeting, workshop, we check in with people. That's what I did with you. I said, what does the change process mean for you? We start all of our meetings with our clients and internally with what's giving you peace and or ease. And that's our anchor question. That's our humanity question. And people are like, look, Dr. Fisher, I'm stressed. Somebody got on a call yesterday. One of our clients said, I'm so stressed. I've never been this stressed in my life. I cannot answer that question. I'm struggling. And I said, let's pause for a moment. I said, we're asking this question because there's a lot going on in the world. And a lot of people like you show up to our meetings because the type of work we do stress. And our goal is to anchor you and to remind you that there's always something small to ground you in the process. And she paused and said, I got 60 roses for Valentine's Day. And some of them are still alive in my house. And I look up, when I come out of my Zoom meeting, and it gives me just a little bit of peace. So what are the 3 pillars that you all have that you feel like must remain grounded? Thank you, Tammy. You can, and if you feel comfortable, you don't have to, you can put one of them in the chat box. But this is really for you to think about. What are the 3 things that must not change, that must stay grounded? And I love this. Someone put in the chat box, our work, we must make sure that we're helping enterprises do their mission safer and better. Now, again, how they do that is going to change. But the core of everything that they're building, I imagine this person is saying, okay, is it helping people be better? Is this helping enterprises be safer? Again, focus, consistency, drive. Letting folks know, no matter what, we stay focused on the goal. We're going to be consistent in what we're doing. These are pillars that you want to keep reminding your people about in the preservation process. And some of you, it might be a process, it might be a strategy that you want to preserve. And then I want you to think about which one of these pillars is most at risk. And the reason why I ask you to think about that is because even when we have anchors, sometimes they're at risk in the change process. So we, brought on someone new, and they're, doing wonderful work in our leadership and operations area internal to our company. And we have a practice on Thursdays where we go through our week and we say, where have we moved with effectiveness, efficiency, and excellence? Those 3 things don't compromise in our company. That's how we operate internally. So we reflect on when have we moved with efficiency, effectiveness, and excellence. And then we reflect on our core values and our norms as a company. And when the person came, they came from a different industry. And so they're now in charge of those meetings. And so they put together our agenda, and the reflection piece of those things were missing. It was just, let's talk about all the tasks we did. And I didn't correct them in front of everybody. I waited till the meeting ended, and we had I asked for a sidebar, and I said, hey, I want to make sure that we still do these as a part of our Thursday meetings. because they anchor us as a team. It gives us a moment to pause and reflect and make sure that we are living what we say. And it gives us a time to be gentle with us and say, yeah, I thought I was going to be more efficient this week, but I wasn't. What can I do to change it for next week? So again, that pillar was at risk because I introduced a new element, right? So, and had I not had it as it must be an anchor in our company, it could have just gone away. And what was an anchor for us would have no longer been an anchor. So I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to give you all some personal examples to help you through this. So anybody want to share which any of their pillars they feel like might be at risk? And if not, that's okay. So I'm going to go to the next one. So now we're going to move into, we talked about what are you going to preserve? We're going to get into the fun part of it, which is like, what are people actually experiencing within your organization? So we're going to get into the recognizing the human impact of all of this. And so sometimes when we see resistance, we see it show up as grief or fatigue. And one of the most dangerous things we can do is to take resistance and see resistance as, you know, the problem. Resistance is a challenge, but we can't just demonize people who are resistant and saying they don't want to do it, or people who are just, you have to know the difference between a true management issue with resistance. Like, is this a true management issue with the resistance, or is there something else? Because sometimes it is a management issue when people are resistant and they're not meant to be on this part of the journey with you. But we can't be so quick to go there, because sometimes resistance is actually grief. It may be fatigue and people are tired. It might be people have fear, or they could have distrust from past change. So it could be that they had a bad experience with change in their organization before, and that still haunts them to this day. It could be that you're deciding to change something and it was the program that this person created. And so now my identity is disrupted because now you're saying you want us to do something completely different. I created this. And now you want to change it? And so what we have to do is let's acknowledge that change is difficult and that people, it will land on people differently. And then we can begin to try to make sure that trust doesn't erode in the change process. So the first thing I encourage people to do is to realize that change is costing people something. And what that means is that we have to ask ourselves, who might be most impacted by the change that I'm doing? Is it our customers? Is it the team? Who is most impacted by this change? What are they losing? So what I say to people is that, you know, people don't necessarily resist change, they resist loss. So sometimes, you know, people might be resisting the loss of autonomy. You know, if this is the way we once moved and then all of a sudden something is changing within the organization, then I might say, hey, I feel like my autonomy is being shifted. My autonomy is being changed. So I might be losing my autonomy, or I might be losing familiarity. If I'm the director and my best friend works in the unit and now you're asking me to change, I might feel like my relationship is going to shift. And I know some people might be thinking, I ain't got nothing to do with work, nothing to do with work. Why do I have to care about this? Because you do, because change really does represent loss to people at times. And then where might I be mistaking fatigue for grief or resistance? So I call this human data, because human data is leadership intelligence. Your people, your humans are going to tell you how they feel, and they're going to let you know. And so I want us to take a moment to think about what's one way that you're going to listen to your people. The action step here is to think about how you can begin to support your people and listen to them. One way could be to create a listening session where you can ask people to give you honest feedback. And so I will say to my team, okay, yeah, I thought I had this as a good idea, but like, what am I missing? How is this change impacting you? Because sometimes I don't see it all. And it's important for us to be able to ask those people. So I'm going to give you a chance to take one action step. And I want you to think about the people that you're working with. And as you think about all the changes that you're asking them to go through, is there something that you feel like there's an impact that you might not have fully acknowledged before? As you heard me talking today, is there an impact that you think you might not have fully acknowledged before? And if you feel comfortable, feel free to drop it in the chat box. Can you all hear me and see me okay? Okay. Have folks thought about an area where you might not have acknowledged change? Okay. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the E, which is resilience practices. So this is really getting you to think about how do you build resilience into the organization. But before I get there, I just want to see a few people, if you're able to, have you thought about how you might get feedback from your teams? Something that you might do in the next week. And if you have, go ahead and write that in the chat box. I'll go back to that slide. Meetings, feedback sessions, okay? One-on-ones, yep. And I know sometimes folks may feel like it's can be a lot to get feedback from people. It can be overwhelming at times, but I want to encourage you to see it as a good way to be able to hear from folks. I'm gonna take a pause moment here. It looks like, is my computer jumping on your end? I think it might be overheating. Let me stop the share here for a moment. Excuse me, bear with me. I want to make sure that you all get the best experience. And rather than act as if nothing is happening, I'm gonna model exactly what I'm saying to you all, which is it's a real human moment. Things happen with technology. So let me make sure that I'm setting us up for success. Okay. So next we're going to go into the embed practices. So embed looks at the fact that resilience must be designed. So resilience and restoration, think of resilience as what do you do to help people be able to sustain themselves? Restoration is how do you pour back into people? And one of the things that we talk about is that restoration is not something that we give to people as a reward. And so this is where I want to really challenge our mindsets that um, sometimes we look at resilience as it's an individual practice. Like, John, you need to make sure you take your days off. Or Janet, you need to make sure that you don't answer your email on the weekends. Okay, it's part individual, but it's also an organizational piece that we have to build in. And it's more than yoga, it's more than breath work. And I believe in all those things. And it's more than just basic time management, because we can't just tell people to self-care in an individual level and think about that as the impact on the system level. So if we have unrealistic timelines that we are asking our people to go through, or if we have communication that's unclear, or if the people that we're working with, we have made their workload so unsustainable, then they can't, no matter what individual things they do, that's not going to change their organizational experience, right? If we have burnout happening organizationally, that's not going to necessarily change people's individual experience. So that's why I say that resilience has to be designed and resilience has to be built into the process. And so when we think about that, you want to make sure that your team has some sacred times for pausing. And so I gave it an example of that when I said we reflect at the end of the week. That's the time for us to pause and check in. And also have a willingness to adjust when new needs arise. So sometimes we set out and we think this is the way to go, and then something happens and we have to change and shift course midway through. I'm sure you all have had to do that before. We can do the same thing in the change process. And we want to make sure that we have structured spaces to build capacity to meet the need. So you might have to hire somebody or bring in someone to do some capacity building so that your team can have the tools and the strategies that they need in order to lead through the change process. And so we want to think about resilience as a form of a rhythm. So I want you to take a moment to think about where you have built pause or reflection into your timeline. So we have a timeline for when we want things to change. I'm curious to see, where have you built in time to pause and reflect? Have we built in time to assess real capacity and not just the output? And what can we temporarily reduce or remove? And I'll share that, as a team, we decided that we needed to adjust, mid-course yesterday, when we realized as we were working, with one of our partners, that this work was taking a lot longer than we anticipated originally. And so we decided, hey, we're going to do like a full shift, and we're only going to, focus on one aspect of the work. I'm trying to, show the person that I'm working with. But we decided we're only going to focus on one aspect of the work because it was taking us a lot of time, and we wanted to make sure that we preserve, our team needed to be sustainable because we have multiple partners. So an action step is to think about, over the next 30 days, what is one resilience piece you can build in? One, you can implement a recurring pulse check. So we do in our meetings high, lows, buffaloes. What's your high for the week? What's your low? A buffalo is like, I don't know, it's not a high, it's not a low, but it's just in my life right now, and I need to talk about it. We do, we reflect on our core values and our norms. We build in those pause moments I shared with you. Listening sessions. We do recalibration checkpoints. So again, what do we need to change or adjust or shift in the process? But these are all ways to keep us sustained and allow us to adjust the workload expectations. And that doesn't mean that, we say we're not doing the change anymore. It's just realizing once we get into this thing and we start moving and going, things have to shift. And so I want to encourage you to make space for this now. And I'm going to give you a chance to jot that down for yourself. Your less practice is, what resilience practice can you embed into your change process immediately? And then what are you going to stop doing to make space for that? Because we're not in denial. When you add something, you often have to take something away. If you feel like your team is, have a lot going on right now. So if you add a resilience practice, such as a milestone pause, or you're going to add in the high-low buffalo, or you're going to add in a recalibration checkpoint, what do we need to recalibrate and adjust and change? Then what are you going to stop doing to make space for that? Because you don't want people to feel like you're compounding things on top of them. So take a few moments to think about what's one resilience practice you want to embed, and then what do you want to stop doing? And I would love to, if folks are able to in the chat box, just share something you might consider stop doing. Okay. And next, we're going to get into the P, which is propel. And this gets us to think about momentum is not just about speed and us just going faster and faster and faster in the process. This is really about sustaining people. So I want to just do a quick pulse check and let me just see. Does anybody have any questions, or is there anything that I haven't brought up yet in those 3 steps, the P, the R, and the E, that you all need me to address? If so, drop it in the chat box so I can just make sure folks are following the line. You're not in front of me visually and I can't see your faces to judge where people are. Okay. So we had someone put in the chat box, one of the tools you can use toward resiliency is leveraging a change network. Yeah, being able to have people with you that's going to be in this process. And I apologize. I realize what's happening. I live in a high rise and it is very, 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 very windy today. And I think this wind is impacting my Wi-Fi. So I want to apologize in advance for that, because normally this is not a challenge, but sometimes when it's really windy, it happens living in a high rise. Do you see value in more standardized change processes or like ADCAR, and how do they interact with PrEP? So I always look at this from a standpoint of you have to know your team and you have to know your people. I believe that there is a world where frameworks are helpful, like PrEP, like ADCAR, but in the end, you take what we give to you as an offering, and then you have to go back to your organization and say, which one of these tools, which one of these strategies will help us in the moment? So the way I often work is I pull from a number of different sources based on my individual team and based on the work that I'm doing within organizations. So I like to I like to not be putting myself or orgs that I work with in sort of a cookie cutter. I look at, okay, what's most helpful for this group of people? Okay, immunity to change. I notice I'm working. These folks are, there's a lot of resistance to change, so I got to help them get under what is it grief? Is it sadness? Is it frustration? And then I'll pull from that. And then I notice, okay, if I'm in with the team, we do a needs assessment. So that helps me also know where people are and what their needs are. I hope that was helpful to whoever asked that question. So the last piece is momentum, which is thinking about how do we sustain traction in the process. And so we have to make sure that we're not being urgent to the point where it's leading to burnout. And all of these things we hear all the time, we have to care about people. But really, when we are leading change, sometimes urgency is a part of it. That's a reality. We can't erase that. But we have to make sure that it isn't always feeling urgent to people and that we're caring about them in the process. And we're thinking about how do we balance it. And so the propel reflection questions really begin to get us to start to think about, how do I take this group of people recognize that we're in the change process, and lead them through this process and build momentum so that they don't collapse or they don't become burnt out. So this is where we start to think about pacing, and we're starting to think about building trust in the process. And we don't want to underestimate how much anxiety shows up in people when we go through the change process. We want to make sure that we're being clear. So part of that is asking what decision requires clearer communication right now. So when you think about where you are, what decision do you feel like needs to be clearer in this moment? What would success look like without exhaustion? Now, there are times where the work gets tiring, but what does success look like without exhaustion? How can we get to the finish line of this process without exhaustion? And then is our pace matching our actual capacity? Like, I'm asking people to move faster, but have I given them the tools that they need to be able to move faster? So the action step here is to clarify one key decision. Think about over the next 2 weeks, what is one key decision that I can make that can help my team feel a bit more sustained? What is one decision? And then publicly name what you've decided and what's coming next, so that you can use that clarity to strengthen trust and be able to sustain the momentum. Someone says exhaustion lets you know that you have it, your all. Yeah, that you kind of are at your wit's end. Giving it your all. Yeah, and I think exhaustion does help us to know that we've given it our all, but it's also a cue that, like, we're not going to make it to the finish line if everybody's exhausted, right? Because people are going to start to get frustrated and build resentment. So what are we going to shift doing? What are we going to change? What are we going to adjust in the process? Because I'm realizing that our folks are exhausted. So this practice step is for you to take a moment to think about what is one decision that you need to make. That you need to communicate things just a bit more clearly. And when you have your decision, if you can please type in the chat box, I have it. And you could take a few moments to do so. Timing. Yes. Expectations. Yes, that is so critical. Thank you all. I'm an interactive facilitator, so I need to make sure that you're still awake. I know some people are listening while they're working, but I just need to make sure that folks are getting what they need from our time. Yeah, deadlines. Think more as a collective thought rather than your own. So true. Yeah, 100%. 100%. We are better together than separate. And that's why we often take an asset-based approach, because there's people who have skills, who love change, who love to do this work. And there's some people who I don't want to be bothered. And being able to know where people's skills are and where people's perspectives are could really help you bring the team together. What's WIFM? I don't use acronyms unless the entire group of people know what the acronyms mean without explaining them. Can you spell that out for us so I make sure that everyone who's reading that can understand it? What's in it for me? Thank you. Thank you for that. And I love that, what's in it for me, because we have to, people aren't experiencing it separate, but we also have to help people to see sometimes the what's in it for you might feel really great, and like the what's in it for you can be exciting because you're going to benefit mostly from it. But sometimes the what's in it for me is we're making a shift or a change because it's going to help 6 of my other colleagues move better and move smoother and have a much more effective work experience. And so this is the time that the what's in it for me might be bigger for them than it is for me, but I'm willing to come along in the process in service of our collective thought. So as we begin to round out our time and go into the Q&A, we spent some time today really talking about this idea of preserving what matters. Number one, which is taking some time to think about what are your anchors? How are you going to anchor yourself throughout this process? And so I'm going to make sure before we get off here, and we're going to I always like to spend the last 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes in Q&A, and then also for folks to take a short survey. But I want to find out from people, did folks at least identify one anchor that you want to preserve? And if you did, go ahead and put that in the chat box for us if you want to engage in this crowd participation. If you selected one anchor, go ahead and put it in the chat box, what you are going to preserve. Consistency, timing, okay? Lots of things. Too much change is scary at once. Yes, 100%. I love that. Thank you for thinking about that. Your team will appreciate it. WIFM. When I started focusing on how this helps them, my sales increased 100%. Yeah, you started inviting people to the table. That change is a part of our environment. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you all. And then the next piece is the R, recognize the human impact. What are some things folks think that they want to do to be able to listen to their team to understand who's being impacted the most? Somebody said, I'm trying to get a team. Okay. Well, the good thing is you're at the front part of the process, the person who said, I'm trying to get a team. So then now that's a good thing for you because you're able to be thinking about this in advance. I learned the pause and restart in my bartending career. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and things that we learn in certain parts of our careers actually help us in other areas. So some of the things I learned in education or running residence halls 20 years ago help me today. Anybody going to host any kind of listening sessions or get feedback from your team, even just to check in to see how the change process is going from their opinion. And you can do an anonymous Google survey. What's working with our current change process? What would you change? You know, if you do it as a Google survey, it's anonymous. People don't have to put their names on it, and you can get some real feedback from people. Ask folks, what are we doing that we should be doing? What are we not doing that we should be doing? Excuse me. Okay, someone says like they're building a team, they didn't have a team, and now they're realizing some of the mistakes they made. And that's the beauty of humanity, is that you can adjust, after the fact when you realize. And then the next thing is embedding resilience practices. So, what are some things people are going to do to embed some resilience practices? The pausing, some of the milestone check-ins. What are some things folks are going to be doing to embed a resilience practice? And I want to say this, that even if you do not have a team and you're running a solo operation, how many people on here are solo founders or running sole operations? You're the only person. Let me get a pulse check of that in this group. Okay, there's a few people. Okay, okay. So folks who are running things on their own. Some people are saying it's just them. Some people are saying they work in partnership with other folks to help with change. Some people are saying that they're contractors, so they come in and they serve in a fractional capacity, or they come in and they perform some level of, work for the team based on their role. Even if you are in this by yourself, because I was solo in these entrepreneurial streets for a while, these are things that you also can think about for yourself. Like, because when you're a solo founder at this moment and you're trying to build the organization, so many people are telling you ideas on what you should do, what you should not do. You're trying to make sure that you bring in the revenue so that you can eat, but at the same time you want to make sure you respond to the needs of the people that you're serving. And so it can sometimes be a lot. And so taking time to think about, like, what do I want to preserve as I'm building this company? Like, what's important? What are some things that I'm not going to change? We call this in the business world mission creep, which is like, some people, after a while, sometimes things will start to creep into your mission, and then you're doing things that you never intended to do. And you can think about, what do I need to preserve as I'm going through the process of building my organization? What is the human impact on me? But also, if you are working with partners, you can think about that for partners. So sometimes we don't think about, as business owners, we serve other people. So when we change a process, our customers are impacted. We have to bring them along the journey. We have to work with them to make sure that they understand the new process, but to recognize the impact on the change that it has on us. I don't know if anybody's ever gone into the grocery store. I like to go to Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe's loves to switch around their store. And I don't know, it's something in their ideas, but it frustrates me as a customer, because I'm like, I want to go and get my item from this area. This is where I normally get my olive oil spray, and now they've changed it. And that has had an impact on me as a customer, but I'm not necessarily thinking they're thinking about that because it's a part of their culture. But it still impacts me. And then how are you embedding resilience in self-checking with you, or being a part of a change network, or being a part of a community of other entrepreneurs? NAWBO does that for me. They help me check in with myself, with other women business owners. And then how are you making sure you sustain momentum? And this person here, was being vulnerable here and saying, like, they've always been told that they're a hard boss, and it's been hindering their progress. So they're here because they want to make sure that they're thinking about the team. And thank you for sharing that, because, sometimes we have to look at ourselves and say, what ways am I contributing to this process? And it can be one thing to have high expectations for the people you work with, and one to have excellence, which is important. But in the same time, what I hear you saying in this is that, like, I'm noticing it's something I have to reflect on with myself, because it's hindering me. You can only go so far. You can only scale. I was a solopreneur. I'm 8 years into the business. Now I have a team of people and, a little under 20 consultants that work with us, but I couldn't do it by myself. If I wanted to be able to do work with state agencies or design statewide training programs, I had to have people with me to be able to be on that journey. So that's what prep is really meant to do, is to slow us down. And I thank you all for letting me divert a little bit to talk about people who are solo here, because I wanted to be responsive to the needs of people who were on our webinar and other people who might listen to it. But really, it's about preserving what matters, recognizing the impact, embedding those resilience practices, and sustaining momentum. I know that the handout is going to be emailed to you, but I'm going to drop it here in the chat box as well, so that folks can have access to that. And what the handout does is it has all of the questions for you, and it will give you a chance to, I recommend doing this with your team, or you can do it with other folks as well. Let's have a few more slides here. So I just kind of want to walk through what we did in this like 75 minutes before we get into the Q&A. We talked about building anchors for preservation. We identified the need for you to get insights from the people you work with. We talked about what can you do to restore people. And we talked about what are some potential ways for you to slow down and think about momentum. And we always say in developing capacity that The power is within you. You know, we can't we can't wait on somebody else to like help lead this change in our organization. Yes, we hire consultants like us to come in and help you, but the power is within you, and you have to trust yourself. You have to be willing to use your power, and you have to be willing to lead with humanity. And for us, that means that we want to give you tools like prep so that when we're not there, you can handle this, because change has to outlast the consultant. We don't want any organization ever to be dependent on us as consultants. Yes, that's how we get our bread and butter, but we don't want dependency from organizations. We want to come in, walk with people, give them the tools, give them the blueprints so that they can fly and do what they need to do when we're no longer with them. And I'm going to go into the Q&A here, but again, change is inevitable, but people's humanity is not. We still have to honor and respect people and your humanity as well as a leader. You're not the pushing bag. Our newsletter that we sent out this morning to our newsletter listserv folks says the title of it was, how to lead change without absorbing everything. And so I want to say that here, like, your humanity is not optional as a person that might be leading other people throughout the change process. You matter too. Whether you're a solo person, whether you're the director, you matter too, which means that you don't become the dumping ground from people. You don't have to shoulder all this by yourself. And you don't have to just push through. My hope is that prep will help you think about how to build resilience for your team, but also yourself. But resilience is not just pushing through, it's building systems and structures around you. And so I always tell people, just do one thing. You don't have to do every step of prep. If you do, it'll help you. But I'm not in denial. You all have full organizational lives. You came here for 75 to 90 minutes with us, but there are a lot of things. But just try one thing. You could take one of these actions over the next 4 months and eat off them for a while. You can take one question, you can take all of these questions in this handout, and it can guide you through the next year of your change process. But just try one thing in the next 2 weeks. Just try one thing, one thing. Try something. You could try something from the P, the R, the E, or the P. Just one thing that you would try out to think about how can you build resilience for your team and yourself in the change process. And my QR code is not coming up, unfortunately. But I will work with BACP to get the QR code sent out to folks. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and open it up for just general Q&A. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, or you could just put them in the chat box. Any questions about the change process or anything that I have shared here today? You are welcome. I will hang out here. I'll pull the slides back up here in case anybody has any questions, but I tend to want to make sure that I leave more room for questions and to talk to you for the whole amount of time. And I'm open if folks want to just ask any questions anonymously in the Q&A about where you might be getting stuck in the change process. Like, have you tried any of the methods or strategies that I discussed with the prep, and you feel like, hey, I noticed I tried this strategy and it didn't work? Let's go to the chat box. Okay. You have a question here? Can you talk a little bit about what happens when things go wrong and your change maybe didn't go perfectly? This is a good question, and thank you for being vulnerable to ask it. What we talk about in developing capacity is that leadership is our best guess in the moment. And when we are designing a change process, we are putting together our best thinking in the moment. And sometimes we realize when we get out there that, hey, what we thought was the right process and strategy was not. How many folks, just to let you know that you're not by yourself, in the chat box, how many people have that happen to? You thought like, hey, I'm so excited. We're gonna do this big fancy thing, and then it flopped. It happens to all of us. So let me first normalize that in the change process, things don't always go as planned. But the biggest thing I say to people, and this is where this framework can come in and help you, the biggest thing I say to people is that when you realize things don't go as planned and it's going wrong, don't double down. This is where you have to take a step back and get on the balcony, as we say in adaptive leadership. And you have to start observing, interpreting, and then making some other intervention. So what does that mean? You realize something went wrong, you can step back and you can there's two protocols I'm going to show you. I'm going to speak to you. They're not in my slides, but I'm going to put them in the chat box here, the phrasing, and then I'll explain them, and then I'll come out. I'm going to write them down, and then I'll explain it. Okay, the first one is what, so what, now what? So that is what happened. So what does this mean for us? So what happened? What about the change process did not work? So what does this mean for us? Now what do we want to do? What, so what, now what? I'm being sort of basic because you're asking me a deeper strategy question, but I want you to lead with something. What, so what, now what? And then the other protocol is start, stop, and continue. So you launched a change, it didn't go the way you want. And I don't want to say perfectly, because no change goes perfectly, period. No change is going to go perfectly. I don't know about any perfect condition. It might go better than you thought. But the start, stop, continue says, okay, I don't know what your issue was, Shay, that happened, the person, and it sort of flopped. But so, for example, I had this great idea. I'll use myself as an example. 3 years ago, I'm like, we should create this management leadership development program, and we should open it up to anybody. And you can just sign up. We're going to advertise it to our current clients, our partners. We're going to put it on social media. We're going to run some ads, and anybody can enroll in this four-module management leadership development program. It was like pulling teeth to get people in that first cohort. And I was like, why? This is a great idea. I know it's needed because our partners are telling us this, and we're hearing it from people in our webinars, we're hearing it in our coaching sessions. And I was like, this isn't going to work. So our team did an after action review. This is the last thing, after action review. And it's what they do it's from the military, but we use it with organizations. And it's, I'm going to write down the questions. It's like a 7-step process, but we break it down to 3 questions. Okay. So the after action review is what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what needs to change. I misspelled change. So what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what needs to change. So let me go back. So we did an after action review as a team. And what I realized from, again, survey feedback from the people who did the original cohort and from the team was that this type of work, a management leadership development program, should be geared towards and catered towards individual organizations so that you can build the psychological safety and you can train up and build capacity with a group of people internal to the same piece. Had I been focused on like staying with that model, it wouldn't have worked. Now we've been able to do that program, but we do it internal to organizations, and we take organizations in cohort form and we build 15 to 20 leaders capacity in that way. So I hope that answered your question about, can you talk about it? Those are 3 strategies you can use to hit the reset button. And the last thing I'll say, one thing people respect about leaders is when you name when mistakes happen, when things didn't go as planned. And as a leader, we have to be willing to name when we got it wrong, or when we made some decisions that had an impact that wasn't the best way to go. And when you do that, you normalize it on your team. So we have a norm in our company that says name mistakes, make amends, and honor the person's humanity. That means that, like, nobody's perfect. Things happen. We name it. If we hurt somebody or we made a mistake that, impacted other people, we make the amends, and then we honor the humanity. We move on from it. We don't freeze people in their worst moment. So part of that I want to encourage us to do is to name when we don't get it right. It's okay. We're not perfect. We're human. Honor it. Give people a chance to give feedback. And this is where we gotta, as I say, Q-tip, quit taking it personal. Don't take it personal if people start to share how we may have gone off course, but provide that structured feedback with the what, so what, now what, start, stop, continue. The after action reviews are all good ways to really then put the process on reflection and begin to think about how you can move and shift. And then someone says, what can happen to an organization that chooses to ignore change and the effects it may have on their people and staff? Wow, that's 2 parts in that question. I'm going to try to break it down because it's meaty. If an organization decides to just ignore the change process, and and I want to make sure I'm understanding, are you saying ignore that they should change? Or are you saying ignore the fact that the change is having a negative aspect on people? I'll answer both because I don't know which one. One, if people choose to ignore the fact that they need to change, then you will probably end up like we've seen, Showbiz Pizza is no longer here. I mean, I'm dating myself from like the 80s and 90s in Chicago, but if you don't change your model sometimes and you ignore that you need to update and adjust, you can end up not being in operation a few years from now. And that does have an impact on your team. Okay, thank you. They came in and saved me. Okay, have the negative impact on staff. So what happens then is people leave, and that's the sad part. When you don't acknowledge the change, when you don't do that recognize the human impact, your people will leave. People will be burnt out. You will end up on, what is it, Glassdoor, as the organization that, people don't want to go and work for anymore. I'm trying to get to the QR code. You'll end up being that organization. And so that's why we started embedding this resilience. We started embedding this checking in on your people, because before I started developing capacity, my whole career was going around the country launching new things in higher ed, departments, campus strategies. And I learned a lot in that process. I bumped my head a lot. We were successful, but I also bumped my head too. And I learned, I'm like, people matter in this process. And you need people to do the work. Organizations do not run on their own. Organizations run with people. And so if people choose not to do that, they're going to find themselves with disgruntled folks, and people are going to start leaving, and the reputation of the organization suffers. But the sad thing about it for me is then the community loses, because you were providing at some point a service to the community that was needed, or a service to a group of people that was needed. And because folks have decided to ignore that, now somebody isn't getting served. And that to me is the sad part. And then now people have to go find new places to work, or they're unhappy. And people spend way too many hours at their job for us to ignore them. And so part of what we try to do is just honor and like the real human pieces of leadership, and not shame people, not shame leaders, not shame their staff, but just try to work with people to create the conditions so that, people could just be a little bit more satisfied at work and you get better productivity. Any other questions? These are really good questions. If you have a moment, I would love to get your feedback on this. Outside of the high winds impacting my PowerPoint jumping, please give me some feedback on what was helpful. There's also a space on there if you want to get on our listserv. We send 2 emails a month to about 700 folks, really just strategies on how do you lead people through the change process, strategies for your own self-leadership and team leadership. And if you scan the QR code, you'll be able to get access there. Any other questions? Folks are holding strong here. I'm here. Um, definitely open to stick around to answer any other questions. I love doing this. This is like I'm living in my purpose. So this kind of stuff is important to me. How do you handle it when you're leading a change you personally don't believe in? Oh, Samuel. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say your name, but you bought the good question, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Um, you bought such a great question because so many of us have had an experience where I have to lead change that I don't believe in. And here's where it gets a little murky, but I'm going to be honest with you because this is how I've coached leaders who've had to do this. And, the first thing is you have to ask yourself, is it a change that you personally don't believe in that doesn't infringe upon your personal values? Because if the change you're leading is like infringing upon your personal values, then at that point you have to make a decision. Do I want to keep moving forward? And I don't this is conflicting with how I like live in the world of my personal values. And in that case, I encourage leaders to think about like what that might do to you as a person. And in that case, some people decide to say, I'm here for 6 months and I'll probably, begin to make an exit strategy because I know I can't be here because it disrupts my personal values. But for the change that you don't believe in, I'm going to go back to the prep because I think this is where it becomes helpful. If you are in a role where you are, you have enough positional authority in the organization, which means you have enough power that's been given to you to shape how certain aspects of the change look, then you can use prep or to be able to help bring in some of those things that you at least believe in. So if you have some control over deciding how the change gets implemented, you can begin to look at preserving what matters for the team. So if you have a good pulse check on your team, or you can send an anonymous Google survey on like what brings people satisfaction and what's most effective and what people have felt very strongly to rally around, you can preserve that in the change process. If you are in charge of meetings, if you're in charge of check-ins, if you're in charge of timelines, you can use your power in that way to set in systems to check in and see how people are doing. If you are able to tinker with, say, instead of you doing steps 1 through 4, you could do steps 1 through 3 your way, then I would use whatever little pieces of authority I have to shift change to be much more supportive and much more honorable for the people that's involved. So you have to look for those nuggets where you can really be able to preserve integrity, be able to, and I'm not saying that people are disintegrous, but be able to preserve some of those things that you know that are important to the organization. Because I want to think the highest thought and say, if you are saying you don't believe in it, you're probably not the only person in the organization that feels that way. And so because of that, what nuggets can you hold on to? If you have some level of relationship capital with the people who are telling you you have to do this, can you use your voice to help them to understand and recognize the impact? Are you able to make decisions that can make sure that the momentum is sustainable and you all try to, again, hold on as you're going through the change process? Some of those things are important to people. But that's what I would give you right now without it being a personal coaching session and we going into the nitty gritty of a sort of stakeholder map for the folks that are involved. I hope that was helpful. And if not, let me know. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Let me go to the Q&A and make sure I'm not missing anything. This is always the juicy part. Okay. Okay. What are your thoughts about companies? Well, let me go back to the prep method. What are your thoughts about companies? Someone said, what are your thoughts about companies that don't provide leadership training for their management teams and employees who aspire to become leaders? Ooh, ooh, okay. I'm going to tell you um, my perspective on that is I'm challenged by it because when people continue to move into management roles and higher roles of authority in the organization, it's important for us to build their capacity because leader roles and management roles can be very lonely, because you are holding a lot in the organization and you and your colleagues are holding a lot. And I believe we have to provide spaces to build y'all's capacity. We have to give sacred spaces for managers and people who are in senior leader roles to be able to just hit the pause button and be able to really share all of what's going on because you can't do that with your team. There's so much you can do with your team and so much you can't. And but I realize some organizations don't have the money. They don't have the funds to hire somebody like us to come in or somebody like other organizations to come in and do leadership capacity building. And so for some people, it's a money issue. And for those groups of people, it's why we decided to start offering our newsletter. It's why we started to do webinar series. So if you go to Developing Capacity's YouTube page, you're going to see probably 16 or 18 months worth of webinars on a variety of different topics on anything you could think of that are 30-minute webinars that we do. We used to do them monthly. Now we're moving into doing them quarterly because we don't have the capacity to do that as much and I can't burn out my team. But we started doing that because what we said is we never want to become so high in our company and the work we do that we forget about the people who don't have the resources to have access to leadership capacity building. So it is my commitment as a CEO and whoever replaces me in the next couple of years that we will always have some bucket of our work that we produce yearly that is free, open access, leadership capacity building content for people who are working in places that cannot afford it or who are working in places that are choosing not to invest in it. People can have something to be able to hold on to get them through the process. And that's why we say yes. I say yes. My team members say yes to opportunities like this with BACP because it gives us a chance to share strategies, to share leadership development with people for free. This is why I love programs like the BACP and programs like Women Business Development Center because they make open access leadership development, business strategy to people who may not have that. But for folks who can't afford it, who are able to put it in their budget, I would encourage them to do so because your people are the folks that's going to help sustain all levels of the organization. And I think it's important for us to do it for people who are in management roles and those who aspire to become leaders as well. And I'll say this, we say in our company that leader and leadership is two separate things. Anybody has the capacity to exercise leadership, no matter where you are in the organization. Leadership is a set of practices, it's the way that you move in the world. A leader is just power somebody gives to perform a role. And you could be a leader at the most top level of the organization, but sure as the person that answers the phone in your organization is a leader. They've been given power to perform a role in your organization. We could still build their leadership capacity. So whenever we work with whole organizations, we require that we do at least one leadership development capacity building with their frontline staff and those who are inspiring to be leaders, because we have to pour into those folks too. The last thing I'll say there is if this is your organization, I might inquire with them about seeing, sometimes budgets are tough and people can't afford it, but I would ask them budgetary wise, what could we afford to bring in someone to do this work with us? Or are there people internal to the organization that we can provide an extra bonus to? Because I want to say that sometimes we have people in our organization that we just burn them out because they have this skill and we make them do all these extra training and we don't compensate them, and then they still have to do their day job too. So in that case, if you might have people in your organization that can do this work or who are trained in it, then I would say, like, how can we give them an additional stipend, and maybe relieve some of their other work so that they're able to pour into people in the organization. I hope that answered your question. I know that was a lot there, but we're down to the last 3 minutes. It has been an honor to be on this call with you all. I thank you for everything that you're doing to service your communities, because anytime you have a business, it's providing some level of service to people, some way, shape, or form. And so just thank you for what you do, because it's not easy leading change. It's not easy leading change right now in our current context. But I thank all of y'all for showing up today. I thank you all for showing up every day at your jobs, giving it your all. And all I can hope is that you walked away from this session with both something from prep that I said, or from the handout, or from the questions that people posed here today, that will help you continue to keep on keeping on. And here's our, you can learn more about us at our website. If you scan the QR code there, you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter. And then if you want to get in contact with me, again, you go through the website, and my assistant will get some time on the calendar for us. And if anything, sign up for our newsletter. You can get kind of these resources on a monthly basis and find out when we do our own webinars. And with that, I think our time is up. Thank you to Business and Consumer Protections. Thank you to NAWBO. And I wish you all have a great day, and that you bring yourself a little bit of peace and ease. Take care, everybody.
Thank you to today's presenter. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, your account will automatically reflect your attendance for today. Today's webinar was recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Please remember to register for our upcoming Small Business Expo. It will be remote via Zoom, scheduled for March 12th at 9:30 a.m. To register, please visit chicago.gov/biz, that's BIZ Expo. Thank you and have a great weekend.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.